Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about the feral peoples of Blue Ridge. Each story will pull you into the unnerving world of those who live far beyond the edges of the map. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. I signed the trail register and clipped the South Lookout keys to my belt. Seasonal gig, pretty straightforward. They gave me a plywood walled cabin, an old two-way radio with a backup battery, and a binder of trail closures that looked like it had been around longer than I'd been alive. My job for the week was simple enough on paper. Walk the retired service tracks along the high water ridge boundary. Note any erosion or fallen trees. Make sure the chain link gate still worked and update the distances on a printed map that had already been patched over in pencil by half a dozen different people. I started with the little utility spur behind the water tank. The map said marker 7 was 1-2 meter from the gate. My step counter agreed. I snapped a photo, logged the number, kept going past marker 9. The track narrowed to 2 dirt ruts with tall grass buzzing between them. In the binder there was this note, no contact pass marker, 1-2 underlined twice in green marker. I figured it was about dead zones for the radio. So every half mile I keyed the handset South Lookout Ranger Cal check. Got a reply every time. Marker 12 was tucked into this tight tunnel of laurel, the post leaning like it was trying to escape. Someone had wired a bunch of bleached twigs into a diagonal X over the number. I took a photo, wrote down to replace the plate later. The air in there felt still, almost heavy, but I kept walking. The trail opened back up at a dry creek, and I made my turn. On the way back, something felt off. The stretch from marker 10 to marker 9 took longer than it had that morning. My counter read half a mile more than it should. I told myself it was a glitch and moved on. By the time I reached the gate, I had a nice boring list of minor fixes. The cabin door only opened if you gave it a hip check. The bed was a mattress frame sitting on milk crates from the supply shed. I kept all my food sealed in plastic bins like I did back home. First night I made dinner, filled out my route card, and listened to the radio chatter at 11:00 when the night crews checked in. Nothing unusual. Day 2. I took the ridge track north, found an old red gate on its side, hinges twisted, wrote it up, took photos, headed back past marker 12. The Laurel corridor felt narrower, and the X on the post. Now it was a star. I hadn't told anyone I'd be back, so either someone was watching or it was a coincidence. I cut it down, pocketed the wire, and logged it. That night, one of my food jars was lying on its side at the back of the bin. I was sure I'd stacked them upright. I decided I just remembered wrong. Day 3. I hauled a coil of chain up to fix the red gate, heard 2 sharp cracks from somewhere off in the trees like someone snapping branches, but the binder said not to go off trail because of old pits and soft ground. I finished the job, double-checked the lock, and headed back. That's when I saw a pile of stripped twigs at knee height that hadn't been there in the morning, with the bark laid in a perfect ring at the base. Back at the cabin, my radio's charging cradle had been turned slightly away from the wall outlet, and the spare battery was sitting on the shelf instead of in the cradle. I wrote it all down so I wouldn't think I imagined it. Day 4. I swapped memory cards on the trail cams. At marker 12, the number plate was gone. Found it under some leaves with the screws neatly piled beside it, like someone had taken care not to damage anything. I didn't have a screwdriver with me, so I just packed it up. That night, I sent the report. My supervisor wrote back, "Keep eyes open, do not engage past 12. No explanation." Day 5. My step counter reset itself mid-hike, and my watch was an hour ahead. One of the lakeside cameras had a little braid of grass tied to its post. On the way back, I found a chain-rung waist high between 2 stumps tied with twine like a tripwire. Cut it down, brought it back. That evening I reached for the salt and found it full of some fine white grit, grainy, tasteless. I bagged it for testing and tossed the container in the trash. Later the trash lid wouldn't close. Inside on top was the same salt container sitting upright on a layer of bark I hadn't put there. I locked the whole bin in the truck. Day 6. I checked the trail cam cards. One of them had 6 shots of marker 11, all slightly different angles. In the last one, a bare human foot-long, dirty toenails was in the corner of the frame. No legs, no footprints. I sent it to my supervisor and asked again about the no engagement thing. He called this time, said there'd been an incident years back, and that if I stayed on task and left them alone, everyone would be fine. When I asked who they were, he just said, locals. Day 7, I went back to marker 12. The corridor now had 2 identical posts, one on each side like an entrance. Both said 12. I walked between them and found a neat braid of grass down the middle of the trail split into 2 at exactly 10 paces. I left it alone. Farther down the gate I'd chained was standing open. The chain looped exactly how I'd left it. Lock still fastened, no footprints. I relocked it, took photos. That night I got a missed call from a number on the North Spur. No audio. The timestamp was 2 hours ahead. Then, around midnight, 3 pairs of soft thuds hit the back wall about a minute apart. I didn't open the door. In the morning, there was a perfect gradient of smooth river stones on the step, smallest to largest, with an acorn balanced on top of the biggest. I pushed them into the bushes with a shovel and locked the shovel in the truck. The rest of the week was more of the same. Objects moved, cameras tampered with, small arrangements of things left where I'd find them. By the 10th day, I'd had enough. That morning I found a little figure made of sticks tied into marker 11. The braid of grass was the same as before. When I cut it down, a ring of grass appeared on the ground, right where I'd been standing. Then I found a gate made of bent saplings where the map showed nothing. Past it, a small clearing ringed by posts wrapped with grass braids. Inside the ring, every single object that had gone missing from me all week laid out like a display. I didn't touch anything, just said out loud, "Thanks for returning my stuff," and left the way I came. Back at the cabin, some of my things had been moved again, including a note I'd left that morning. The string I'd once found rigged to my back door was hanging there again. I packed my bag. Then I signed out at the gate, handed in my report, slid my badge across the desk, and drove away from High Water Ridge. Music. My caretaker shift started at 6:00. I pulled the truck up to the old gate, ran the lock through the chain, and walked the fence line with my clipboard tucked under one arm. The owner's instructions were simple enough. Keep their private stretch of green hollow intact. Report any trespassing. Fix what breaks. Send photos and coordinates once a week. It was steady work, just quiet and remote enough that most people didn't want the job. I didn't mind. My cabin sat smack in the middle of the property. One room enough for me, and the paperwork was as much a part of my routine as breathing. The first weird thing didn't even set off alarms. At marker 3, the trail just stops at a big rock shelf. There, in damp clay, I found a bunch of narrow footprints that didn't lead anywhere. No path in, no path out, just there. Close together, toes turned a little in like someone had stood still for a long time. I logged it as loitering sign, took a photo with a ruler for scale, and kept moving. 2 days later, the latch on the south gate was on the wrong side of the post. There's only one way to set it, so the loop can't slip free, and whoever touched it had almost, but not quite done it right. I fixed it, wrote it up as an attempted access, then checked the barn. Everything looked normal until I spotted one bucket hung 2 hooks to the left of its usual spot. Not much, but I know my hooks. I put it back, swept up, locked the place. I almost never saw people out there. That's why the next thing caught me. Along the service road, 12 rock cans were stacked in a perfect line, same size, evenly spaced, each one topped with a walnut shell. The stones weren't weathered like creek rock. They were sharp-edged, like they'd been broken recently. I left 2 cairns for photos and took the rest apart. My days didn't change much. Rounds in the morning, paperwork midday, a short break perimeter check before sunset. I kept the cabin neat tools by the door first aid kit under the table radio on the shelf, spare keys labeled in a jar on the kitchen counter. The jar lid rattled just enough to remind me to put it back. On Thursday I went for a key and froze. The tags were swapped. The barn tag was on the pump shed key, and the pump shed tag hung on the gate key that normally never leaves my truck. The handwriting was almost mine, but cleaner, like someone practicing my style without my little quirks. I fixed the tags, put both keys in a locked drawer, and noted it as unauthorized handling. That afternoon I brought my dog Jasper on patrol. He's steady, doesn't get distracted by deer or squirrels. In the lower meadow he stopped cold, staring at the tree line. No growl, no bark, just a locked-in look. I checked with binoculars. Nothing moved. Up the slope I found a survey post, leaning a few degrees off. My last note had it perfectly level. I straightened it and packed the soil tight. That night I checked supplies. The can of fencing staples labeled 200 was 20 short. I hadn't used any. In the freezer, 3 packs of venison were standing up instead of lying flat. I fixed them, shut the lid, and kept going. Fridays the owner liked time stamps. Fence at 7:15 gate, at 7:42 barn, at 8:03 cabin, at 8:19. But when I compared my belt notebook to the digital log, there was a missing hour blank lines between 8:19 and 9:21. The notebook still had the times on the tablet. They blinked in and out like bad reception. I wrote everything down twice just in case. By noon, distances felt off. I was reaching markers too quickly, like the land had shrunk. GPS didn't agree. At marker 2, a branch ladder leaned up the slope. It was lashed with strips of black cloth, buckeye wood. None of it grew there. I pulled it apart and stored it in the barn. On the ridge opposite, a lone figure stood too thin for a hiker with gear closed, wrong for the weather. They didn't wave. I kept walking. Jasper stayed calm. Back at the cabin, the lock looked wrong. The bolt had been thrown from the outside and unlocked again, leaving a smudge on the plate. I changed locks, pocketed the spares, and burned the old ones in the fire pit until they bent. Bagged the scraps for disposal. Later that afternoon, I found a cord braided from grass and roots hanging chest high across the trail. 3 square wooden toggles in the middle, cut from the same wood as my marker posts. 200 YD later, another cord at knee height, this one threaded with feathers from no bird that belonged here. I bagged both, logged them. The owner called after reading my report, told me to keep at it until a handyman could come next week. I asked for new locks and made it clear I'd handle the keys myself. By 4, the shed door was open an inch. Nothing missing, everything just rearranged. Hammers upside down. Tape measures pulled out 3 in, then rolled back neatly. Chainsaw bar bone dry when I'd left it oiled. The nails in my labeled tins all mixed together in layers, just so I spent an hour sorting them, noting simulation of order in the log. At 9:12 that night, Jasper stood at the door, head tilted. I stepped outside with my stick and radio. The porch board shivered, not from weight, but a tapping beneath the threshold. The crawlspace hatch had fresh scrapes by the latch. I bolted it from the inside. At 10:40, I found another stone line outside the barn. 12 again, same spacing, each topped with a cloth strip. I bagged one, moved the stones into a pile. 5 minutes later, the stones were lined up again. 8, this time right at the barn door. I didn't touch them. I parked the truck with a bumper blocking the entrance. The next day, I kept circuits short timing, unpredictable. At 8:10, the gate was open, chain looped, but unlatched like someone practicing closing it. At 9:33, my property map fell off the wall. Behind it, a second map I'd never seen with 3 extra circles marked on ridges that don't exist. I locked both maps away. Around noon, Jasper tugged me sideways into the alder grove. When we came out, the road bent to meet us like we'd looped back without walking the middle. GPS showed nothing unusual. I staked the ground, walked away, and came back to find the stake 2 FT higher. At the pump shed, a brand new padlock hung on the door. Not mine. Inside, a ring of damp footprints faced inward. No dirt, no debris, just moisture that faded as I watched. Late afternoon, I saw silhouettes shifting along the ridge. 2 here, 3 there, keeping distance, matching my stops and starts. At marker 6, a woman stepped out, short hair cut blunt, with something not meant for hair. She backed away into brush without turning. I just wrote presentation in the log. I called the county. Deputy rolled out, looked at my notes and bags. Told me you hold the line. They move along, no names, no theories. Suggested I keep a vehicle between me and open ground when possible. That night I set motion alarms inside. At 11:09, Knox moved along the cabin wall, steady testing. I opened the door fast. No one there, but the stone line now curved toward the cabin. Sunday morning, the porch chain was tied into a knot, identical to the cord knots. My coffee mug sat under it, filled with coiled grass. Not trash, not a gift, a request. I bagged the knot, posted a blunt sign. Private work site, I do not share. Do not cross. By noon, a new fire ring sat by the creek, filled with small, clean bones. A stone nearby had scratches in groups that matched the stone counts I'd seen before. I scattered the bones, wrecked the ring, and went back to find my bathroom mirror on the porch handprint. On the back, 1 finger missing. I put it back inside and jammed a chair under the doorknob. After dark, I decided leaving at first light. I packed, staged everything by the door. At 4:33, I drove out. Figures stood along the ridge in pairs. One stepped forward, raised a hand, sideways held it, dropped it. No idea what it meant. I kept driving, locked the gate behind me, didn't look back. The plan was simple. Signed the log, checked every seal twice, counted straps, like it was a religion, then rolled the dolly into the truck bay. The list was short. 2 bins of dry staples, a single fuel canister coil of nylon rope restock for the first aid kit, 6 sacks of AA batteries, and 1 envelope marked Maps Revised. Scanned the envelope, shoved it under the visor, and headed out toward the access road that climbs the North Arbor Range in a mess of stacked switchbacks. The truck only takes those turns in low gear, so patience is part of the job. I keep a sticky note by the odometer with tally marks for each hairpin. Saves me from second guying when the mile markers get lazy. The first hour was nothing special. Steady hum, steady climb. Not another soul on the road. Past mile 43. The asphalt narrows enough that you stay perfectly centered and don't even think about testing the shoulder. There's a quarry pull-off. I used it to give the brakes a break, then eased back in and focused on the next bend. That's when 3 people stepped across the road in front of me. Not in a hurry, not looking around, just walking. I slowed, let them finish crossing. They reached the far shoulder, stepped into the brush, and vanished. Could have been hikers cutting over from one trail to another. I marked the time in my log and kept driving. 2 miles later, 3 people crossed again. Same spacing between them, same head angle, same pace, but this time they came from the other side. I caught them in the side mirror, watched them reach the verge, and then there was just empty road behind me. Could have been a different group. Could have been nothing. The North Arbor holds plenty of folks who don't care to be found. By the next turnout, I pulled over and stepped down to check the slope for a footpath. I measure things when I'm not sure. 12 steps down to the first sapling, 15 to the second. A little water cut, then a wall of mountain laurel thick enough to stop anything with legs. No signs anyone had pushed through. My boot print was the only fresh one in the clay. I made a note, no visible path, and got back on the climb. The camp radio channel was dead. My handset flickered between 1 bar and none. I tried the call sign twice. Nothing. Station 7 sits on a ridge shelf above a ravine-locked gate. Spin the combo, drive in, lock it behind you, then crawl up gravel to a handful of plain buildings. I know the place. One main cabin with the logbook, a storage shed, 3 sleeping huts, staggered out a tool rack and a covered water stash. Normally 6 people rotate in 10-day shifts, half asleep, half on the trails. I hit the gate code, rolled through, parked by the shed. Everything looked buttoned up, doors closed, lids down, nothing on the benches, lock lights steady. I don't trust impressions, so I went straight for the logbook. Last full entry was just regular maintenance notes from the weekend. The next line stopped mid-sentence. Movement in the tree line again, no finish. The pen was still on the page, and the time box was empty. I called out the station name in a normal voice. Nothing. Walked a circuit. 2 huts had beds rolled tight. One had sheets folded halfway down. A kettle sat empty on the counter, lid tossed aside. The tool rack had gaps where shovels should be, but no sign of them anywhere. Food bin latched. Water stash had 2 full jugs. 4 empty. On the main table, 5 plastic name tags were stacked. The 6th was flipped face down. Little details, but they add up. I unloaded supplies, slow took photos, made notes. As I worked, things started moving. The rope coil I'd set on the porch ended up leaning against the door. A knife I'd left on the table showed up on the window ledge. The map envelope from my visor was suddenly on the cabin floor. I told myself I'd misplaced them, reset everything, took 10 slow breaths, checked again. Outside at the tree-line, maybe 30 or 40 people stood evenly spaced between the pines. They weren't coming closer, weren't talking, just standing. Different clothes, different hair, some carrying little bundles. Couldn't make out the faces. When I looked away and back, they hadn't moved. I called out, "Station 7 supply run." No answer. I held up the envelope. "Need this redistributed." A kid in the middle lifted a hand, dropped it. Someone else made a looping gesture near their head. Could have meant time listening. Who knows? I kept my hands where they could see them and went back inside. The logbook had shifted a few inches. The pen was capped now. A new scrap of paper sat by it. A hand-drawn map showing the lane, the clearing, and a path upslope that doesn't exist. An X marked far beyond the cabins. No label. I pocketed it and logged the time. When I went to load the empties, my truck locks clicked without me touching the fob. The seat was pushed forward 2 notches, visor down, glove box open, with the registration half out. I put it all back, slow-checked the perimeter. The group hadn't moved. I wrapped up the drop and headed downhill, half a mile to the gate, then switchbacks to the main road. A 4 mile down, a straight log blocked both lanes, too clean cut to be natural. The winch slipped, so I rolled it with the tire, pivoted it enough to squeeze by. When I got back, in a perfectly balanced stone sat on the hood. Took it off, set it down. At the gate, the chain was looped in a way I'd never seen. Took me 7 minutes to undo it. When I finally got through, I hit the descent. Then the trio crossed the road again. Should have been miles behind me. A half mile later, they crossed again from the other side. My odometer didn't match my notes, and my dash clock said 6 minutes had passed since the gate. My watch said 19. Pulled into a turnout. No trio in sight. Just 5 people spaced evenly along the uphill shoulder. I rolled forward in short stretches, resetting the trip meter each time. The 5 became 7, then 9. A narrow section of road came and went, replaced instantly by normal width. My hairpin count no longer matched the land. Halfway down the crate I'd left on the porch blocked the road. Same tape, same seal, same initials. I opened it, everything inside exactly as delivered. I sealed it, marked it with a star, strapped it in the bed. A minute later, it was blocking the lane again. I dragged it into the ditch, weighted it with a rock, and moved on. Next came cords strung across the lane between stakes. Not tight, more like a net. I cut the lowest line and 2 more appeared. Faces in the trees watched me, maybe 20. A woman lifted a stick, set it straight down at the road's edge, and tossed a pebble across the paint. No one spoke. I backed into a pull-off, tried the shoulder, slipped under the highest line. The watchers shifted positions to keep perfect spacing on either side. It felt like I was driving through someone's drill formation. I tried the radio again. No signal. My watch and truck clock still refused to agree. I told myself, stay in the lane, avoid contact, keep moving until I saw a sign I knew. Near the quarry cut 2 long lines of people formed a funnel. One man stepped into the road, layered shirts, patched vest, hands up. I stopped a few yards short. "Do you need assistance?" I asked. He made a series of motions, ear-shoulder pulling at something invisible. Looked at my truck bed, at the straps, at the latch. No words. I told him I'd report the station empty, that I could call for help from the highway. He traced my passenger door frame, tapped twice, then pointed at me and back up the road like he wanted me to turn around. I didn't. I asked him to step aside. He did, but the funnel was closing. I edged forward. The loop of cord ahead rose toward the bed. I kept steady pressure on the gas. It grazed the wall but didn't catch. Someone reached for the strap end and missed. From there the formations thinned. Small groups spaced like they were measuring something. Final block before the main road. The crate again perfectly centered, starred initials facing me. I didn't get out. Pushed it into the ditch with the bumper. A sheet of paper fluttered up. Slapped my windshield. Same hand-drawn map. The X pressed deep into the page. I stowed it. At the T-junction, 3 people waited on the center line. The same trio by gait and build. I rolled toward them at walking pace. They shifted sideways in perfect sync. Every time I adjusted my lane, I picked a line dead through the middle, gave the truck just enough speed to make them choose. After a breath, they stepped back 3 paces, opening a gap exactly the width of my bumper. I didn't look at them. I just drove the center and didn't touch a shoulder. Then I was over the county line. My name is Rook. I had my trail permit, clipped it to the post at mile 0, same as always, and started the survey. This wasn't a pleasure hike. I was out there working for the Trail Club, logging an old Blue Ridge fire road, counting washouts, marking culverts, noting where the road narrowed. My checklist was on a waterproof card in my chest pocket, and my system was pure muscle memory. Pace counts, waypoints, distances, and pencil, because pencil never quits. The road started easy, straight stretch slide uphill. First gate, first ditch, first blowdown. Big enough to need a cross-cut crew. Check, check, check. Every 100 steps I stopped, looked at the odometer, wrote my numbers. I set little orange flags on thorn stems where side drainages crossed. I was alone on purpose. Less noise, less debate, less chance of anyone arguing over which spur to trust. By mid-morning, I hit a surprise, a double-track peeling right that wasn't on the club's map. The main road kept climbing, but I had a process. I backed up 20 steps, scratched an X in the dirt with my pole, and walked the spur exactly 10 minutes before turning back. When I got there, the X was gone, smoothed over, like someone had dragged a boot across it, slow and neat. I marked it again and moved on. At mile 3, the culverts weren't matching the old 1998 notes distance. Between 2 of them was short by about a third. I double-checked, counting in my head. Same result. Not unusual for old notes to be off, so I just penciled in a question mark and kept going. I picked my campsite before Sunset Club rules. No rushing for the car, no shortcuts. Found a hollow 10 strides off the road. Ran a cord between saplings for a perimeter. Hung my food can low so I could grab it quick. Logged my coordinates. Took my boots off. Dried my socks over my knee and set my knife and headlamp by my hip. Same every trip. Some time later, my watch face lit up 114. I hadn't set an alarm. I didn't move, didn't touch anything, just kept my breathing even. If you stay still, you notice what doesn't fit. I waited it out without opening the zipper. Morning came, and my perimeter cord had a new knot right at chest height, not one I use. Grass was tucked into it, trimmed clean. Inside the tent, my knife had shifted 3 in. Headlamp aimed at the ceiling instead of the door. I noted it all, untied the knot, retied it my way, and kept moving. Mile 4 brought something stranger, a blue blaze on a tree we hadn't painted this season. Stroke was too thin, a tremor in the line. It was almost our style, but not quite. A second one showed up a 4 mile later, same hand behind it. I photographed both and went on. The next fork had fresh scuffing along the left side, bark smudged at hip height. I marked it and tried the right branch first. Found an old stacked stone head wall, measured it, noted it, came back. My flag was gone. In its place was a bundle palm-sized wrapped in vine, full of thin chalky shards like eggshell. I moved it aside, replanted a flag, and took the left fork. 5 minutes later, it looped right back to the main road, tight compressed, like the land had been folded in. Another question mark. Later, I cached a liter bottle under a rock flake. Coming back an hour later, it was sitting free cap off, label peeled, and one perfect strip coiled on top. The rock had been livered from the side and replaced so it looked untouched. I tossed the bottle marked compromised. That afternoon I saw my first person, if you could call it that. Across the way, low to the ground, knees tucked under, hair forward, bare skin. No clothes, no gear head, tilted just enough to be watching about 100 yards off. I didn't look twice, just tied my shoe and kept going. At my next stop, my pack had a folded slip of paper under the hip belt, my trailhead register page. My name was printed right except for one letter, rounded instead of angled, smelled like the register box. I didn't wave it around. Camp that night was tighter paracord instead of the usual line. Photos of every knot with the time showing on my watch. Woke up to 2 or 3 and another new knot, this time with a grass braid tied into it. Boots turned around, crushed can moved, knife on my stomach. I waited 60 seconds before touching anything. Morning. I headed for the quickest way out west along the main road toward the Timberland connector. Found 2 lines of stakes across the road, each capped with little strips of bone. I pulled all 12 and laid them aside. Then I passed the same rusted refrigerator I'd already recorded miles earlier. Same 6 spray painted on it. Either there were 2 or the map was lying. I walked wide around it, not far past that. They were there again, 3 of them this time, crouched across the road like a gate. I stripped my pack of anything I couldn't replace, slid those into my thigh pocket, lifted the pack an inch, set it down. The middle one reached into it without moving forward, pulled out my register page, studied it, put it back in the side mesh. I backed into the trees, stayed parallel to the road, found a ring of bones on a bench cut, and above it, a lashed wooden frame with hair tied to the corners. I cut down slope, rejoined the road later. At a narrow pinch, a cord stretched across at shin height, toggled into the dirt. I freed it, coiled it, and left it. For the next mile, I saw more of their little edits. My flags rearranged, my marks copied wrong, chirons leading nowhere. I stuck to my compass and feet, finally saw the gate through the trier's fresh chain, knot instead of padlock. I slipped through a narrow side path, shoved my pack through first. On my hood, my tent stakes were arranged into a triangle, vertebra in the middle. Didn't touch it, swept it off. Under my wiper, the register page again, my name rewritten bigger, my permit number circled and boxed. I folded it, stuck it under the seat, and got in the car. On the other side of the gate, they stood in a line. The middle one raised an arm, held it there. No rush, no chase. I put my hands at 10, and 2 started the engine and drove off the ridge. I set my pen down, glanced at the 2 empty parking spaces, one mine one with no car, and started up the Blue Ridge service road with my pack. Just under 40 lb. I'd folded the topo map so the little circled campsite was right on top, 4 miles and simple enough. I checked my watch 6:10 and figured if I kept a steady pace, I'd be setting up before mighty morning. I'd picked this route because the map showed a short spur to an old survey marker with a primitive site nearby. My plan wasn't exactly ambitious. Hike in set camp, jot the coordinates, and hike out before tomorrow afternoon. The service road was easy walking. At the first junction, I double-checked Blaze numbers against the map, counted my steps, and stayed on the main track until the spur appeared. It was narrower but obvious broken branch stubs at shoulder-height ruts from old boots. I followed it straight to a small clearing, maybe the size of a bedroom. There was a shallow stone ring for fires and a little dent in the dirt where others had camped. Next to a crooked tree trunk, someone had hammered in 2 nails at different heights, like the start of a ladder they never finished. I logged my coordinates in my notebook, put up my tent, ran guidelines to routes, and hung my food bag from the higher nail. I filtered water-made noodles, washed the pot. Nothing special, just ticking items off my list. After lunch, I packed the stove, counted my matches, tested my lighter. I set an alarm for 21:30 in case. I lit a fire later, then walked a slow loop around the site to memorize where everything was. Road to the north spur, to the west, faint game trail sloping southeast. I sketched it on the map's margin. The first weird thing was tiny. When I got back to my pack, my map was sitting on the fire ring instead of inside the tent vestibule where I'd left it. No wind, no slope. It hadn't slid out. I didn't see anyone, so I told myself I must have misplaced it. I put it back, zipped the vestibule, and shoved the pack inside so it touched the tent wall. Easy fix. Later I walked over to the survey marker, a short metal stake worn almost flat with the dirt, and traced the numbers in my notebook because they were hard to read. Back at camp I ran a bearing drill 20 paces north, 25 east, 20 south, 25 west. Our first time I ended up 3 FT from my tent door. Second time I came back to the fire ring and noticed 3 small stones had been added. Same color, same shape as the others. I hadn't touched them. I cooked early and decided against a fire. I broke the larger sticks in the ring and scattered them so it was obvious. Then I strung a thin trip line from a tent stake to a root near the spur entrance. Not a trap, just something to alert me if anyone came through. I texted a friend my coordinates and when I'd check in tomorrow. Then I stretched out in the tent with a manual I'd brought, setting my watch to wake me at intervals. Oddity number 2 came when I stepped out to loosen up. My bear bag, which I tied to the higher nail with 2 half hitches, was now hanging from the lower nail with a single overhand knot I never use. The rope wasn't frayed, the sack wasn't touched, everything was still inside. I rehung it my way and checked the dirt for footprints. Just the same scuffs from my boots. I told myself maybe a ranger had checked it, but honestly, why would they? I tied the tent zippers together so I'd hear them if moved. Put my phone, wallet, keys, and headlamp in the corner inside and touched them all, locking that memory in my head. If I had to bail fast, I'd follow the slope. Keep the 2 nail trunk on my left. Hit the spur, then the road. Simple. Then a man stepped into view. Not from the spur, not from the road. Just appeared at the far edge of the clearing, barefoot, carrying nothing. He stood by the fire ring like he was watching to see if I'd do something wrong. I asked if he needed water or directions. No reaction. Just looked at my tent, then my food bag, and walked past the trunk toward that southeast trail. Oddity number 3 came right after the zipper ties I just made undone. I hadn't heard them. I redid them tighter. Put my phone in my pocket, clipped the headlamp above me, and sat in the tent doorway, watching that southeast gap until the light faded. I lay down, let the alarms guide me toward short naps. At some point I woke up and the fire ring was burning. 6 people sat around it. The barefoot man was there close enough for me to see the rough skin on his hands. The others wore bits of leather cloth, small trinkets I didn't recognize. I unzipped halfway. A woman spoke in a language I didn't know. 2 men grabbed my arms and pulled me up. I told them I had nothing they needed. They emptied my pockets, took my phone, wallet, keys, headlamp, even checked my socks. One tapped my pack with his foot, but left it. They moved calmly like this was routine. They led me out through that southeast trail. We didn't hit the spur. We moved sideways along the slope, not up or down, never stumbling. At one split they nudged me without speaking. After about 30 minutes, we stopped in a shallow, soft patch of ground. One hand pushed between my shoulder blades, and then, bang, a hard hit to the back of my head. Not enough to knock me out, just enough to blur the edges. By the time I looked up, they were gone. I sat for a minute, then 2, then 3. No blood, just fog. I stood, picked higher ground, figuring the service road ran above camp, and walked straight, careful to remember the order of trees and deadfall, so I wouldn't circle back. After 30 minutes, my legs shook. I crouched by a stump palm, pressed to the dirt. My mind kept telling me to stop, to turn back, to call out, but I kept going. Then my markers changed. The scar I'd been tracking on a certain tree was suddenly on the wrong side. That was the fourth oddity. My own trail signs different. A moving light appeared ahead, sweeping side to side. I called out once. The beam turned toward me, and 3 more figures stepped in behind it. I turned right and ran, keeping the light on my left, until it disappeared. Then I walked fast, counting steps in 20s to keep from panicking. For the next 2 hours I avoided trails unless they went uphill. Twice I hit deadfall, once a low dip that looped me before spitting me out. I muttered the road marker numbers I'd memorized earlier, even though I didn't have the map in hand anymore. Eventually the trees spread apart. The ground changed to gravel and hard clay, straight line both ways. I picked left. Half an hour later, I felt a faint vibration, underfoot traffic somewhere ahead. The lane widened, and I found a paved road. I stepped onto the shoulder and raised my palms forward. A pickup slowed, stopped. The driver leaned over, unlocked the door. I got in and kept my hands still on my knees until we were moving. I figured I'd take the Blue Ridge detour, keep a steady pace, skip any stops, and make up some of the time I'd lose on the back roads. I had my phone tracking the route until the map froze. The little blue dots stuck in place and the signal bars dropped to nothing. The screen just sat there, showing this dotted line like it still knew where I was. So I ditched it and pulled the old paper atlas from behind the seat. Not ideal, but the page looked straightforward. One clean road over the ridge, just a couple junctions. I told myself it had looped back to the main highway easy enough. For a while it felt like it would. Mile markers slid by the odometer, ticked up, and I kept putting the detour behind me, one county at a time. Then on a long curve, there was this guy standing just inside the lane line. He didn't wave, didn't step out, didn't even turn his head as I passed. I folded down the corner of the atlas page so I could check it later. Probably a hiker, I thought. Figured I'd see his car just around the bend. Nope. A few miles later, my dashboard clock blinked, reset itself to midnight, then jumped back to the correct time. I tapped the plastic cover like that would fix anything and kept driving. Then I saw another person, this one crouched at the edge where the shoulder pinched down, both hands on the gravel like bracing against nothing. No backpack, no reflective vest, nothing you'd expect on a mountain road. Just stayed in that position as I passed, perfectly still. I stopped at a four-way that didn't exist on my map. The atlas showed one southbound road, but the painted arrows said pick left or right. Contour lines said both were the same grade. So I went left and jotted the time in the margin so I could match it against my gas. When I looked back up, the dashboard clock showed exactly the same time I'd just written down, to the minute. Even though I'd been sitting there for a while, that road had a couple pull-offs. At the second one, I stopped to stretch and refold the atlas so it'd sit flat. While I was out there, I noticed a line of barefoot prints in the dust-deep heels, light toes like someone had been pacing along the road. No cars anywhere. I got back in, buckled up, and merged without lingering, past a broken cooler on the right lid hanging by one hinge. 2 bends later, another one exactly the same. Told myself it was just a popular model falling off the same brand of truck. At another split, the map didn't show. There was a wooden sign pointing toward a town I'd already been through hours earlier. The distance listed matched the miles I'd already driven since the detour. I ignored it and stayed straight. That's when I started seeing people again. All was near lane pinches, all was still. By the time I counted 15, some were standing, some crouched, some on all fours, with hands flat. No one moved toward me. No one waved. They felt more like survey markers than people. I decided to turn back to the last fork and take the other road. On the way, I passed a footpath I swear hadn't been there before. 2 stakes wrapped in spirals of flannel strips marking it. Maybe I'd just been looking at the atlas earlier and missed it. Took the right branch this time. The map said it should drop into a valley, but the road climbed. The engine load meter crept up. On the inside lane, I saw long scrape marks like metal skids had dragged through. I stayed centered, steady speed, looking for any road number. None came. Checked my phone again. Date was right. Alarm still set, but there was a new outgoing call. 13 seconds to a number I didn't recognize. Lock screen, so no way I'd but dialed. When I tried to open the call log, the phone froze, then kicked me back to the home screen. I set it face down. The pavement ended without warning, just widened into a gravel pad with a chain timber gate at the end. A cardboard square dangled from the chain with a hand-drawn arrow pointing toward the hinge. The hinge pin had fresh scratches, like someone had been working it. My map didn't show any gate here, and the roads didn't even match up to the atlas lines anymore. I decided, nope, not opening that. I put the car in reverse, and that's when I saw them. Several people evenly spaced along the edge where gravel met brush. One holding a length of chain, another with a board under an arm, a third with strips of cloth tied to a wrist and ankle, all just watching. The chain carrier stepped forward 1 pace as I backed up. Something smacked the rear glass hard enough to crack at a rock from somewhere behind my left shoulder. I didn't turn to look, just kept rolling, smooth, deliberate. 2 of them started walking after me fast enough to keep up. One brushed fingertips along my trunk lid. I steered between them, just wide enough not to touch, then down branches across the lane, stacked low in a crisscross. I decided to straddle them instead of pushing through. Another rock hit my rear panel. I sped up. When I got back to the original fork, I took the opposite road without stopping, supposed to go downhill, but it didn't. The slope stayed the same. The miles on the dash didn't match the map scale. I stopped briefly at a pull-off and grabbed for the atlas from the glove box, except it was already open on the passenger seat on a different page, with a thin ink circle drawn around an unlabeled cluster of roads. Not my pen, not my mark. And the circle matched exactly the distance I'd driven since the gate, if I trusted the car's numbers. I pinned the atlas under my thigh and kept driving. The people came back. Same board, now in different hands. Same chain guy now with cloth tied around both wrists. Always placed so the lane was barely open, always stepping just enough to keep distance. The fuel gauge dropped faster than it should have. My outside temp readout bounced up and down without reason. I passed the same rusted metal bin 3 times, the last time with flannel tied to the handle. The phone gained a new folder named with a dot inside blank app slots. When I tried to shut it down, it restarted on its own. That mystery call. Now there were 2 identical entries. Fresh barefoot prints again, this time in a loop off the road with a board in the middle strung with cord and knots. A chain mark dragged into the trees. I didn't slow down. A low cinder block building came up a service bay half open, hose-coiled tires stacked. As I passed, someone stepped out holding the board, stretching it across their hands, like they were measuring the lane. Finally, after hours of nothing, I saw a county sign, but it didn't match my map. A second sign pointed to a highway I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near, yet the odometer reading matched the number under it in the atlas, right inside that inked circle. I followed it. Near the end, the road narrowed again. 2 trucks idled nose-tunts in a pull-off. 5 people stood between them. No logos, no buckles, each with a strip of cloth tied somewhere. One with the chain, one with the board, one with rebar twisted with wire. Their positions could have closed the lane if they'd wanted. I kept my speed eyes locked on the gap between rebar and chain. At the last second, they stepped back, giving me just inches on either side. The rebar nicked my rear door. The chain clinked to the ground behind me. The board carrier tapped my fender, looked at his fingertip, and stepped away. After that, the slope finally leveled. The Atlas page lined up again. Cell bars came back. The phantom calls disappeared from my log. The weird folder vanished. My clock stopped jumping. And there it was, a highway sign with numbers I trusted. I didn't think about it. I run the Ridgemont Parkway turnout log every other week, which meant that morning the keyring and a dented orange clipboard were mine. Signed out, the truck glanced over the route sheet, loaded up the usual kit loppers, mattock line trimmer, extra guardrail pins, cones, trash grabber, 2 rolls of flagging tape. Same old. The plan was straightforward. Check mileposts, clear brush around culverts, and mark a slumped shoulder for the greater crew. My partner got pulled to a guardrail hit near a scenic overlook, so I was on my own for the quiet stretch. My supervisor's note at the bottom of the sheet was, "Just stay on schedule, check in at noon. Easy enough." I left the yard right at the top of the hour and headed south. First turnout came up fast. 2 cones down milepost, logged. Quick sweep for bottles in the ditch. The ditch was spotless. I turned back toward the truck. Only the loppers weren't there. I found them 30 steps inside the treeine, resting neatly on a mossy rock. Latch clicked shut like I just put them away. I hadn't. No scuffs, no dirt, no sign. Anyone had yanked them from the truck. No clear footprints either. I counted my steps again, shrugged it off as me getting distracted, and finished up. Next stop was a covert flagged on the map as clogged. Parked cones down mattock in hand. The pipe was clear, but upstream. Someone had scraped the silt into a perfect half ring, like they'd scooped it with a pan. Looked almost decorative. I shot a short video for the report, panned the camera, and spotted my spare flagging tape tied to a branch across the channel. Compact little bow, not my style. Both rolls had been in the truck. No survey paint, no boundary markers, just a faint deer trail on the far side. I cut it down, pocketed. It made a note, and kept going. By mid-morning, the mileposts were off. 2 separate posts carried the same number, just 2 bends apart, both perfectly standard. I measured them, photographed each with the truck in frame, and noticed a single pale hair tucked under a washer on the second post, long folded with care. I don't carry hair. I bagged it, marked the plate for inspection, and kept rolling. Stopped for lunch at a picnic pull-off. Nobody around. Called in, told the supervisor, "Ditch clear, weird culvert staging, duplicate milepost hair on hardware, all still on schedule." He said to mark the slump shoulder at mile 168 with blue tape and meet the greater crew near the old maintenance gate at 171. Packed up and went. The slump was nothing special. 10 yards of shallow subsidence. I painted 3 X's, staked them, tied blue tape. Back at the truck, my paint can was sitting in the passenger footwell, full weight clean. The one I just used with my dent near the rim was still in the bed. The 2 were identical down to the serial stamp. I stared at them for a second, then put one in the bed and one in the cab. Reached the maintenance gate. No greater crew. Gate had 3 chains instead of the usual one. 2 were light gauge knotted with cord instead of locked with bone-white shells dangling like charms. Not ours. I texted the supervisor a photo. No reply. My dashboard clock said 12:17. My phone said 103. Reset the phone. It stayed at 103. Tried the radio, it glitched, then went blank. Gave up. Turned around to hit a side pull-off that was late on the list. It wasn't where the map said. Same guardrail, different sign arrow pointing to an empty slope. Pulled in anyway. A neat row of 19 flat stones lined the edge of the gravel. Didn't see them when I arrived. My tire tracks ran parallel, not touching them. I picked one up, put it in. The bed turned back row was full again. Checked the bed. The stone was tucked under my spare tire, latched down like I'd left it that way all day. No dust on it. Then I saw them, one tall figure, up on the slope standing still. Another smaller tangled hair, bare shoulders, both staring right at me. I called up asking if they needed help. No answer. The tall one held up a washer with a loop of blue tape through it, placed it on the ground. The smaller one pushed a stripped screw toward my boot, hot to the touch like it had been near a flame. I pocketed it with a glove. A third person appeared near the front bumper, tapping a thin, curved stick toward my tire. 2 parallel scratches led to a cord looped around the sway bar in a rock. Clever hitch released cleanly when I pulled. I tied it to a cone leg and looked up. The 3 of them shifted positions without rushing, each taking a different angle like they'd rehearsed. I got in the cab lined up for the exit. The stone row now had 21. Didn't bother counting again. As I drove, I passed the maintenance gate twice more, each time the shells in a different order. On the 3rd pass, I cut one cord pocketed. The shell noted the fiber looked plant-based and told the supervisor I was heading back. No confirmation. The odometer ticked up, but landmarks didn't match. Then I saw a turnout, not on any map. No milepost, no paint-fresh tire rut. Pulled in, put a cone behind the truck it tipped and rolled under, then somehow was upright again at the rear bumper. Inside the apron, a ladder of sticks, tied with the same vegetal cord stretched across. 10 seconds earlier, it hadn't been there. I untied one knot and the whole thing fell apart, threw it in the bed. 3 heads rose from the slope. Same spacing, same alignment, all watching different parts of my truck. They made hand signals to each other. The smallest held up 2 bolts, clean threads. The tall one balanced a hitch lock cap. No idea where they'd gotten them so fast. I didn't stop to ask. Called the supervisor again. No answer. The next milepost number was out of sequence. Found logs staked in a V-shape across an old fire road entrance. Cords knotted to pull away in one motion, left them for a crew. My Matic was now leaning against the driver's tire handle, pointing toward the slope. 2 turnouts later, my phone battery dropped a third instantly. The charger wouldn't seat in the port. At the last turnout, a brand new milepost stood with no record on my map. On my hood, a barbed fence staple wrapped in folded blue tape. Behind the post, the 3 figures again, plus 2 more. 1 older woman with a ring of washers. 1 close-cropped man holding a tow strap from our inventory. My handwriting still on it. I wasn't playing their game. Turned toward the ranger station spur. The spur had 2 gates now, one directly behind the other. The second was mine from 2 months ago, somehow welded in place with new posts. A loop of cord stretched across the space between gate and marker post for me, not the truck, cut it. Walked around the truck's fender. 2 more loops, one with a small bag tied to it. Cut them all. The first gate's lock worked fine. The second had our lock shroud but wasn't actually locked. It was tied with more cord. 1 smart pull and it loosened. Behind me, the 5 of them stood in a perfect line, each holding one of my items: the tow strap, the paint can, the washers, the cord, the pointer. They didn't move toward me. They just watched. I muscled the second gate open inch by inch until I could get the truck through. Once I cleared, I left both gates open, grabbed the tow strap from my bed, and tossed it into the pocket between them. Not at them, just on their stage. Something out of place to fix. Then I drove straight to the yard, rolled through our own gate, dropped the bar, and locked it. I was 31 when it happened. The cabin wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Just 2 nights long enough to break up a long drive before heading farther south. I'd been on the road for hours already and wanted a place where I could crash without spending a fortune. I found it online, buried between overpriced vacation homes and corporate-looking rentals. This one was cheap, tucked away in a part of the Blue Ridge the listing claimed locals called the Narrowback. The photos were nothing special. Weathered wood siding a porch swing, a little driveway gate, but the email from the owner stuck in my head along with the directions he'd written. Keep the gate shut at all times, so nothing wanders in. I figured he meant bears maybe a stray dog out here. That sounded reasonable. By the time I pulled off the main road, the sun was dropping behind the ridge. The 2-lane highway narrowed to 1, then turned into cracked asphalt, and finally into a gravel path winding up through the trees. My tires crunched on loose rock as the drive curled in tight switchbacks, the forest pressing in from both sides. When I reached the gate, I had to get out and lift the latch, the cold metal biting my fingers. I drove through, climbed out again to shut it, and made sure the latch clicked. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. Nothing fancy, but solid. 2 rooms, a small kitchen with a propane stove, and 1 bed that looked a little too neatly made, like it belonged in a listing photo. No cell service, which I'd expected. I tossed my bag on the bed, cooked a quick dinner, and took it out to the porch. The swing creaked under my weight, and for a while I just sat there, with my plate listening to the woods. It wasn't quiet, far from it. The trees seemed alive with chirps, rustles, and some deep echoing call I couldn't place. I turned in early, no reason to stay up, but sometime before dawn I woke to a sound that didn't fit. Not the quick scurry of a raccoon or the heavy shuffle of a bear. This was softer, slower. It came in bursts, like someone running their hands through a pile of dry leaves, pausing, then starting again. I held still in the dark, listening. Every so often it would stop completely, then pick up again from the same spot. My mind kept trying to pin it to something normal, but nothing made sense. Eventually it faded, and I told myself it had to be an animal rooting around. Morning brought cold, clear air. I made coffee, ate a granola bar, and decided to try the trail behind the cabin. The path wasn't maintained. Roots curled across the dirt like knuckled fingers, the ground soft in some places and rock-hard in others. The canopy above filtered the sunlight so the ground stayed dim. Even in the middle of the day, the air smelled like damp leaves and something faintly metallic, almost like wet iron. About 30 minutes in, I came across a small clearing. In its center was a circle of stones, maybe 3 ft across. Each stone had a carved symbol, rough-line shapes I didn't recognize. Some were old and worn edges smoothed by time. Others looked like they'd been cut recently, the grooves sharp and pale compared to the weathered ones. I crouched to get a better look and ran my fingertip along one of the fresh carvings. That's when I heard it, one sharp snap. It was close, a branch breaking under weight, not quick like a startled deer, slow, controlled. I froze, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but the air felt empty. No bird calls, no insect buzz, just stillness. My chest felt tight. I stood up and walked back toward the cabin, not running but faster than before, my eyes flicking left and right with every step. When the cabin came into view, so did the gate. It was wide open. The padlock still dangled from the post, untouched, but the latch hung loose. I could have sworn I'd shut it when I arrived. I told myself maybe I'd left it open that morning without realizing, or maybe the wind had caught it. I latched it again, sliding the bolt home until I heard the click and tried to push it out of my mind. That night I woke again, but this time I knew what I was hearing. Footsteps on the porch. They weren't heavy like boots soft or bare feet. The boards creaked 1 or 2 at a time, then silence. Another creak like someone was testing how much sound they made before moving again. My whole body tensed, but I didn't move. The steps went from one end of the porch to the other. Then came another sound. Fingernails light and slow, dragging along the wall, testing the wood. The sound stopped near the door. In the strip of moonlight under the frame, I saw a shadow pass over it. Just for a moment I stayed frozen until pale daylight crept in. By the final morning, I was done. I packed in minutes, tossed everything in the car, and went to latch the gate behind me. That's when I saw it. The inside latch smeared with mud. Except it wasn't just mud. There were fingerprints in it, long, narrow ones with a strange curve like there were too many joints. I glanced toward the trail. At first it was empty. Then my eyes adjusted. 3 figures stood just inside the tree, perfectly still, too far away to see faces, but their arms hung lower than they should, elbows bent outward in unnatural angles. What skin I could see looked pale against the dark woods if it was skin. None of them moved. I got in the car and drove until the road widened, and I saw another vehicle. My hands didn't stop shaking for miles. When I finally glanced in the mirror, the trail was gone from view. It looked like nothing had been there at all. That whole summer, I'd been taking whatever work I could find that didn't involve fluorescent lights or sitting behind a desk, clearing land, hauling brush, trimming overgrowth if it paid in cash, and kept me outside. I was in. A lot of it came through word of mouth. Somebody's cousin needed fence post pulled. A neighbor had a field choked with kudzu, that kind of thing. This job came from a guy I'd never met. He'd inherited 80 acres out in the Blue Ridge foothills, way back from anything you'd call a road. He lived 3 states away, and from what he told me, hadn't stepped on the property in over 10 years. His email was short. He needed someone to walk the perimeter with a GPS check that the property boundaries were where the survey said they were, and mark any big trees that should come down before hunting season. It sounded simple enough. The first thing that caught my attention, though, was the map he sent. The property wasn't anywhere near a main road. You had to take a turnoff onto a gravel spur, follow it, until even the county stopped pretending to maintain it, and then hike in from there. No visible clearings on the aerial view, no buildings, no trails beyond what looked like faint old ruts that had probably been cut back when people still logged that area. When the day came, the weather couldn't have been better. Cool enough that I wouldn't sweat through my shirt in the first hour, dry enough that I wouldn't be slipping down slopes. I parked on the widest shoulder I could find, right where the gravel spur started to vanish under weeds and saplings. My pack was already loaded, flagging tape, spray paint, hand saw gloves, water, and my GPS unit. 6 or 7 hours, I told myself I'd be back before dark. At first, the walking was easy. The old logging road was still there if you looked for it. A double track where the undergrowth was thinner and the ground a little more compact. I didn't have to duck any branches, just step over the occasional fallen limb. But maybe 15 minutes in the track, narrowed branches started closing in, and I found myself weaving between saplings instead of following anything clear. The GPS dropped signal the first time not long after that. 1 second it said I was right on the edge of the property. The next, nothing, just a blank screen. When it came back, my marker had jumped 20 yards sideways like I'd taken a flying leap. It happened again 10 minutes later. I told myself it was just the canopy messing with it. It's not unusual in dense woods. About 40 minutes in, I reached a small creek. According to the map, there should have been 2 of them cutting across the property in almost parallel lines. But this one was the only thing I saw narrow barely a trickle, with a bed of smooth stones and damp leaves. The other was either bone dry, or I'd already crossed it without realizing. The slope started after that. At first it was gentle, but then I had to lean forward and grab the occasional branch just to keep my footing. That's when I saw something through the trees, low to the ground, covered in leaves and vines. Up close it wasn't what I thought. Not a hunting blind, not a shed. The wood was dark-aged, maybe rotting, but the shape was the weird part. It wasn't squared off like anything you'd build with planks. Instead, it was like someone had bent green saplings into an uneven oval and lashed them together until they dried that way. The inside was filled solid with packed earth, not fallen leaves or natural debris. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to make sense of it, before pulling out my phone and snapping a few pictures. After that, the trail, or what passed for one, was swallowed by mountain laurel. I had to push it aside with both hands to get through. Somewhere in there I noticed the ground looked wrong. Not just beaten down like a deer path. The patches were wide and flattened with long bare impressions, human-sized, no tread marks. I crouched to get a better look. Some still held cloudy rainwater. I've seen barefoot hikers before, but not this deep in the woods and not in groups. I counted at least a dozen distinct prints overlapping before I gave up. Around midday, I shoved through another wall of rhododendron and stepped into a clearing that shouldn't have been there. It was a perfect circle. No stumps, no burn marks, just bare ground like nothing had ever grown there. In the center was a ring of stones, maybe 4 ft high, stacked with care. It was big enough that I could have stepped inside. The hollow space in the middle wasn't empty. Bones. They weren't scattered like a predator kill. They were piled mixed together, short bones, long bones, and one skull on its side staring out. The eye sockets were too big for any animal I knew. Some of the bones still had scraps of hide, attached, leathery and dark. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the stones until the trees hid them from view. My GPS still wouldn't lock on, so I picked a direction downhill. Eventually, I'd hit the road. I'd made it maybe 200 yards when I saw them. At first, I thought I was looking at pale tree trunks. Then, one moved. 3 figures crouched low in the brush. No clothes hair in thick matted ropes, skin a gray-white that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Their limbs were long, wrong elbows and knees just a little off from where they should be. They didn't speak, but I could hear them breathing wet, deliberate breaths. The closest one rose slowly, tilting its head like it was scenting the air. I turned, walking fast, not running, not yet. My boots snagged on roots, forcing me to catch myself with my hands. Then I heard them movement to my left, movement to my right. They weren't behind me. They were keeping pace through the trees. I picked up speed, ducking branches, hopping fallen logs. The forest floor was slick in places, and every time I slipped, the sound of their movement drew closer. The slope steepened ahead, and I half slid down it. A root caught my heel, sending me face first into the dirt. My palms burned, but I didn't stop. I scrambled up and kept running until the trees thinned, and I saw the pale gray strip of road through the underbrush. I burst out of the woods, stumbled into the ditch, then sprinted for my truck. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. I got in, started the engine, and looked back. They were just inside the tree line, standing watching. One tilted its head again, slow and deliberate. That was enough. I dropped the shifter into drive, slammed the gas, and didn't stop until I hit the main highway and saw cell service return on my phone. I was 29 when it happened. I'd picked up this month-long gig clearing brush along an old service road past Carter's Ridge. The guy who hired me wasn't interested in small talk. No paperwork, no questions, just a thick envelope of cash and a rundown of the job. Cut down whatever had overgrown into the road. Drag it into piles. Burn what you can. That was it. He didn't even tell me who actually owned the land, and I didn't ask. My van was parked at the very end of the gravel stretch where the road gave up and turned to dirt. It was one of those spots where you know you're the last person out here. There's no accidental drive-by. If someone shows up, they've got a reason. The first week went exactly like you'd expect. Morning started with sunlight through the windshield and coffee from my dented thermos. I'd work until the shadows started stretching across the road, toss together something quick for dinner over the fire, then crash in the van. The forest was quiet in that heavy, steady way people romanticize. No traffic hum, no neighbors' music bleeding through walls, just the occasional hiss of wind in the leaves. By the second week, though, things weren't feeling as steady. It started mid-morning on a Tuesday. I just dropped a clump of thorny vines into a burn pile when I noticed them bare footprints pressed into the dirt just off the road. Small ones. The toes spread wider than you'd expect, the way feet do when they've never been squeezed into shoes. They ran parallel to the road for maybe 30 yards before disappearing into the brush. I told myself it was just some kid from a cabin on the far side of the ridge. Still, the thought didn't sit right. You don't just wander into this place unless you're aiming for it, and even then it's a hike. The next day, more prints, only this time bigger. Not just one set either. Some were narrow, some wide, and they overlapped in looping, almost playful patterns that doubled back on themselves. It was like watching someone doodle on the road with their feet. None of the tracks headed toward the paved road. Every single one came from deeper in the forest and vanished the same way. That's when I realized it wasn't just me noticing the quiet anymore. The air itself felt like it was waiting for something. By Thursday, things got less easy to brush off. I was working near the far bend, hacking branches off a downed tree. Somewhere in the tree line to my right, I heard movement. At first, I thought deer slow, cautious steps. then a pause, then another step. But a deer will bolt once it knows you're there. This didn't. The sound stayed level with me, matching my pace. I finally turned my head and swear to God there it was. A crouched figure, pale skin against the dark brush, long hair matted into thick ropes, limbs so thin I wondered how they supported themselves. I only caught it for a heartbeat before it slid backward into the undergrowth without making a single sound. That night, I locked the van from the inside for the first time since I'd started. Work light on knife on the seat next to me. Sleep was a joke. Every creak of the van frame felt like a knock. Next morning, I opened the door and froze. Sitting dead center on the hood was a bundle of sticks tied with twine into the rough shape of a human figure. The twine was damp, and when I touched it, I saw the ends weren't cut. They were frayed like they'd been chewed through. I set it down fast. By mid-afternoon, I'd made up my mind. I was done. A week early fine. Let them keep the extra pay. I started packing slow because, somehow, rushing felt like it would draw attention. One by one, I put my tools back in the van exactly how I'd unpack them. It felt like if I broke the routine, I'd regret it. I was rolling up my extension cord when I caught it. Movement at the far bend. Two figures stood just inside the tree-lined barefoot skin stir, with mud clothes hanging in shredded strips. The taller one's shoulders hunched forward, arms hanging low like they were too heavy. The smaller one didn't move at all, just tilted its head slightly, like it was listening for something only it could hear. I froze mid-roll. My fingers went numb on the cord. Then the taller one leaned toward the smaller, and I saw the smaller one's lips part, not to talk, but to breathe in long and slow, like it was tasting the air between us. I made myself walk, slow, steady, back to the van, locked the doors, turned the key. Gravel spat from under the tires as I backed down the road. My eyes kept flicking between the windshield and the rear view. They didn't follow, but they didn't fade back either. They just stayed there at the bend, their heads tracking my van like I was some animal wandering off. When the tires finally hit paved road, I let myself breathe. Then I made the mistake of looking at the hood. Two handprints perfectly formed in the dried dirt, smudged outward like someone had leaned there.